for the past few days, I've been building the doors for my kitchen cabinets, and I'm at the stage now where they're all assembled, and I need to sand them. And this is the stage where a lot of people, a lot of woodworkers, kind of, I don't know, maybe they're getting, like me, getting sick of the project by this time, and they kind of slack off on the sanding. But when you look at well-made furniture, every step of the process that goes into building it is done very well, and sanding is no exception. And that's where you're going to see the biggest difference between something that looks like it's made by an amateur and something that's made by a professional, how well the sanding is done. So I'm going to show it here on this door. I've already sanded the back, and I've also sanded the ends of the panels here. I use biscuit splines to reinforce the joint between the stiles and the rails on these doors, and they were sticking out a little bit. I trimmed them back on my miter saw first, and then I sanded them flush using my belt sander, and then I finished that up for now with my sanding block here. I ran it along the edge. Now for the faces, I'm using my random orbit sander, and on here I have a 220 grit disc. And like I said, I've already done the back, and that's nice and smooth and flush. So I'm going to flip the panel over, and I'm going to sand the other side. The other side is the side that shows the other, this is the back, this is the front of the panel. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time sanding this and making sure that it's absolutely clean and flush. Okay, a couple things I need to point out here. Notice when I'm starting the random orbit sander, I don't have the tool sitting down on the wood when I start it. I'm also not letting it come up to full speed and full spin before I set it down. It's kind of something you have to practice, and you'll get used to doing it after you've been doing it for a while. But you really need to start, push the trigger in on the tool to get it going before you put it down on the wood. But like, you want to be in the middle there somewhere. You don't want to have it stopped, but you don't want it to be going full spin type thing. You want to kind of land it, I guess you could say. And what that does is it avoids those huge swirls that you can get from these sanders. Another thing is that when you're sanding wood always has a grain direction, even plywood, of course, and you always want to be sanding as much as possible in the direction of the grain. You do not want to be going across the grain. Avoid that whenever you can. Now here I have a corner, the grain is going this way and it's going this way. So what I'm doing is I'm taking an L-shaped pattern around there, and I'm making sure that I go in the direction of the grain. The other thing worth mentioning is these discs get dull after a certain amount of time. And even though it feels sharp, like it still feels gritty, when you compare it to a brand new one, you can definitely feel the difference. Now, a lot of people think that you can use those crepe blocks that clean the sanding disc, and that will get rid of, the junk or whatever. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't make the sandpaper any sharper. And so it's still not going to be cutting any better. So you really need to know when to change out the disc. Here with me, I figure I can probably get, I think this is the 5th door I'm sanding with this disc, and I think after that I'm going to switch it over to a new one, because I can definitely feel the difference in the sharpness on this one than on this one, especially in the center. And if you can look here, you'll see that it's a different color in the center here. That means it's wearing out more. Whenever I'm sanding, I try to keep the sander as flat and level as possible, but if you really want to concentrate on an area, you can push it harder on the rim of the sander as well. And it'll use this outer part, and like I say, it'll concentrate the sanding action to, a smaller area. It won't be over this entire 6-inch surface right here. But you do need to be more careful when you're using the edge like that, because it can aggressively dig in, especially if you're using a coarse disc. I just finished up with the random orbit sander, and I'm checking all of my joints, and they all feel smooth. You can look at this until the cows come home, and you will not be able to get the same level of accuracy as for flushness as you will with touch. I always want to touch the joints to make sure that they are absolutely flush. And check my miters in here and see if they're good. And everything looks good. So I'm going to move on to the next stage, and that's to round over the edges. Now, I'm taking this a little bit more than some people would. I'm not making them, apple round, but I'm putting about maybe a 1/16 of an inch radius on here. I want it to be soft looking type thing. So what I'm going to start with is my block plane. And basically what I'm going to do is take 3 strokes to chamfer the corner first. And then I'm going to follow that up with this sanding block to actually make the round over. And notice when I'm using the block plane on the end of the panel here, that I'm going from both directions, and that avoids chip out when you cut a cross grain like I'm doing here. And then when I finish with that, I can take it up and look at it, make sure everything's good. Sometimes the block plane can chip out, dig in deep. You have to watch out for that. It's one of the bigger drawbacks of using this tool, is how aggressively it can dig into wavy or grain that's not straight. And then I can move on to the next edge and do the same. And what I'll do is I'll work my way all the way around the door panel, and then I'll flip it over and I'll do exactly the same for the other side. Okay, I finished with the perimeter. I've checked it over. Everything looks good. I sanded this with 100 grit paper, and that's okay for this because I'm going to be using a clear finish on this. If you are going to be doing any kind of a stain, you would probably want to step that up after the 100 to 220 grit, and that'll get rid of those scratches that this sandpaper puts in there. And the reason why you want to step up the sanding for stain is because stain will get in those scratches and really show up in the final product. Anyway, so that's the edge, and the face is done. I still have some more sanding to do. I don't have any more to do on the back because that's looking good. There's no more detail on the back. However, I've got this trim on the inside here that has a little bit of a reveal all the way around. This is a style of door that I made for here. And I've got 2 areas that I need to sand. I need to sand that reveal on the inside, and I need to do that very carefully so that I don't make any scratches in the areas that are around it. And I also just need to break the very edge of this molding here to make it less sharp. And to do that, I'm going to be using my sanding stick very carefully, just running it across until I have a very small chamfer there. I don't need to round this over. All right, after all the sanding is done, a visual inspection will show me any other areas that need to be looked at or touched up. And looking this over, I can't see any. Everything looks good. Like I said, I'm clear finishing these, but if I was staining it, I would spend probably twice as long sanding this, because I would have to do everything that I just did with the 100 grit disc or paper again with 220 to make sure that all of those sanding scratches are minimized at least. And I would have to closely inspect the surface to make sure that the sander didn't leave any swirls behind that would be really evident when you put stain on. That's why I used to like using stain, thinking, I don't know, that it was somehow noble to do all that extra work. But these days, I really appreciate the natural look of wood, and I avoid stains whenever possible, especially on finished furniture. I think it's better to select the wood that is the color that you want to use in the project and go with that. Like here, I'm using maple and I'm leaving it natural, and I really like the way that looks after it gets coated with that water-based polyurethane.